everyone, and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you are new. Today I'm going to be filming my March wrap-up. Before we get started, I want to say that I couldn't decide if I wanted to take my hair down or leave it up for this video. I decided to leave it up. I hope it doesn't look that ugly. Also, this sweatshirt is probably older than I am, and it's got a picture of my mom's cats on it that she had when I was born like 20 years ago. That's Smokey, that's Cuddles. They were very nice cats. Rest in peace. But I also just realized that it's white, and I hope that doesn't like throw off my white balance, which I don't know how any of that stuff works. Like, I'm just trying to film a wrap up. As per usual, let's jump into some statistics. In March, I ended up reading 10 books, which is quite a lot for me, and most of those got read during the end of the month when I was out of work and had all the free time in the world to read, and I had an absolute blast doing it. So I'm really happy with how many books I read this month, and I read a grand total of 2,660 pages approximately. I actually read a couple of audiobooks this month, and I don't include the page count for the audiobooks in my total page count, so technically I probably read over 3,000 pages this month or last month. As far as the different genres, I read 2 classics, 2 contemporaries, 2 fantasies, 1 nonfiction book, 1 sci-fi, 1 romance, and 1 thriller. 5 of them were physical, 3 were audiobooks, and then 2 were ebooks. I had 1 1-star read, 2 2-star reads, 1 3.5-star read, 5 4-star reads, and then 1 4.5-star read. 3 of the books I read were adult, 6 of them were young adult, and 1 was a middle grade. 7 of them I borrowed from the library, or I found the audiobook on YouTube, and 3 of them are ones that I had already owned. And then I always like to go over the years that the different books were released. So we have an 1892, 2017, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 1902, 2014, 2016, and 2020. So the first book I picked up in March I actually listened to on audio, and that was Yellow Wallpaper. This is a like thriller, I would say, like a psychological thriller classic. It is extremely short, so I'm not going to tell you much about it because I think you should just go into it blind anyway. But I heard a lot of great things about this book, so I wanted to read it, and I couldn't find the like ebook version on my Overdrive app, so I ended up finding just like a free audiobook of it on YouTube, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really clever. I can't really say too much about it because it is a like really short story, and so I don't want to spoil anything, and I feel like the only discussion to be had about it is about like what happens in the book, so I can't say too much, but I really liked it, and I would recommend for you to pick it up as well because it's really, really short. The second book I picked up in March was Turtles All the Way Down by John Green, and I read this as an ebook. Before I tell you about what this book is about and my thoughts on it, I just want to preface it by saying that I have read one other John Green book in my entire life, and that was The Fault in Our Stars, years and years and years and years and years ago, like when the movie first came out and the book was like super popular, and I hated it. Unpopular opinion, I know, but I despised that book so much that I like swore myself off the author. I was like, I'm never gonna pick up another one of his books. But I was looking on my Overdrive app for an ebook because I just prefer to read those at work. They're just easier to bring than like an actual book. So I was looking for an ebook that I could like download right there and didn't have a wait list, and this was one of the first ones that came up that I was a little bit interested in because I was really intrigued how the title would relate to the story. So I ended up picking it up kind of like apprehensively, but I actually really enjoyed it. Thing is, when I was like making my list of books that I read this month, which I made that list yesterday, I got to the Turtles All the Way Down and I was like, what was that book about? So while I really enjoyed it while I was reading it, I guess this book wasn't super memorable for me because I really had to refresh my mind about what the plot of that book even was. So it's really fun in the moment, but not super memorable. So now watch me struggle to give you a synopsis. So in this book we follow our main character, who I don't remember her name at all. But we basically follow like her and her best friend, and when they were kids they were friends with this boy, and now it's like many, many years later and they're no longer friends with him, but his dad, who is like a billionaire, has gone missing, and was like involved in like some shady stuff. So the police like release this reward that if whoever can like give information as to where he is will get this reward. So our main character and her best friend are trying to figure out where this guy's dad is, so they end up like reconnecting with the guy, and our main character ends up forming a little bit more of a relationship with him. So it's like a little bit of a mystery as they try to figure out where this guy's dad is. It's a little bit of a romance, and our main character also has anxiety, which was definitely probably my favorite part about this book because I really, really related to it. I know it's like out there, but I personally haven't really read a whole lot of anxiety rep within books or even like movies and TV shows, but when I do, I feel like it tends to be very focused on like social anxiety is like the rep that I tend to see the most, whereas this one, she was kind of more of like a germaphobe, and a lot of her like anxiety came from like germs and like medical stuff and like getting a disease or something like that, and that is where all of my anxiety comes from. So I found this book very, very relatable, and I thought that the anxiety part of it was done really well, and it didn't like her character wasn't defined by her anxiety. It was in it just enough that it was good, but it didn't feel forced or like it took over the storyline at all. Like, I just think it was done really, really well, and I did have a fun, like, it was a good time reading it. Like, the plot and the romance, I was invested in both of them, and I enjoyed both of them. It was a good story. It just wasn't super memorable. Like, it didn't, besides the anxiety stuff, the plot and all that stuff didn't stick with me for a very long time. So it was fun, but not super, like, memorable. I then picked up This Is Where It Ends. I also read this as an ebook, and this is about a school shooting. I think it takes place over about an hour. Like, at the beginning of each chapter tells you, like, what the time is, and you can see, like, how fast it takes for all of this stuff to go down, and we follow a couple of different characters throughout it. I know this book was like really popular on BookTube back in like 2016, which I think is when it came out, but obviously I didn't get around to reading it until now because I'm always one step behind everybody else. But I didn't really like this book that much, honestly. I don't really know how to explain my thoughts on this book because when I went into it, I wasn't really sure what I was expecting or what I was hoping for. Like, I wasn't sure if this was going to be some kind of like thriller, like high intense thriller, if it was gonna go more towards like a very like meaningful, like moving sort of story. In the end, I'm still not really sure what it was. It didn't really seem like it was either of those. Anytime I felt like I was really getting into the story, we would have like a flashback scene. So while it does take place over an hour, a lot of it is flashbacks to like explain the characters' actions more so we can like understand them. But every time I would get into the story, we would have like a flashback scene and it would completely pull me out of the moment. And also, I just didn't really like any of the characters, and I didn't feel like the motives behind what they were doing were really well explained, and especially like the shooter in here, it was very kind of like black and white, good or bad. Like, that's not how it is in real life. Like, people are more complex than how they seem to be in this book. So I just didn't really like it. Can't really say that I would recommend it, sorry. The next book I picked up was Renegades by Marissa Meyer. I have been waiting ages to read this book, and now that all three of them are out, I decided to just binge the series, although then all the library shut down, so I couldn't get the third book from the library yet, but as soon as I can, I'm going to read that as well. But this is basically like a superhero versus villains kind of story, and we follow two characters. The first one is Nova, and she is kind of a part of the villains gang, but she decides to go undercover as a renegade. So basically, like, in this world, I think it takes place like in the future, where people have developed like some people have developed like superpowers, and they're called prodigies, and then there are the renegades, which are like the superheroes, and there aren't really like cops or like any kind of law enforcement. It's just kind of like the renegades that like protect everybody. So prodigies can like try out to become a renegade. So Nova decides to like go undercover as a prodigy and try to get in with the renegades. And then we're also following, I forgot his first name, Adrian, was that his name? Adrian, yes. As you can see, my memory is not good. I really enjoyed this book, by the way. I should preface that my memory is just actually really bad. And then we're also following Adrian, who is a renegade, and he has just got a lot going on. You'll have to read the book to find out. But I really, really enjoyed this. I'm not surprised at all because I love Marissa Meyer. I have to say, I didn't enjoy it quite as much as I wanted to. I did a 5-star prediction video and this was in there, but this wasn't quite a 5-star for me. I still really, really loved it. Like, don't get me wrong, but it just didn't quite do it for me. I think it's because it took me quite a while to get into this. Y'all already know I have a bad memory when it comes to books, and I have a very hard time keeping track when there's like a lot of characters, and there were a lot of characters in this book. But not only that, but they had their like normal names, and then they all had their like superhero names or supervillain names. So sometimes they'd be referred to by their name, and then sometimes they'd be referred to by their superhero name, and I had to try to keep track of who all of those were and like what their different powers were, how they were related to each other. It was a lot. And our main character, Nova, she's got 3 different names because she's called Nova, but then her supervillain name is Nightmare, and then when she tries to join the Renegades, she gives herself the name of Insomnia as her like superhero name. So there was just a lot to keep track of, so it took me a little bit to get into the story, but once I got into it, I was really invested in it. As per usual, she writes amazing and super lovable characters. That was definitely my favorite part of this. And then the only other sort of issue I had, since the name thing is kind of more of my issue and not the book's issue, but I do feel like the book was a little bit longer than it needed to be. So I still really enjoyed it, but it had a couple flaws. I then dove straight into Archenemies, which is the sequel, and this one I also really enjoyed, but not as much as Renegades. This one I feel like definitely had a little bit of like the second book syndrome, because I feel like it was definitely more of like a setup for the third book, and again, it was longer than it needed to be. And I can't tell you much else because it's a sequel, but I still really enjoyed it. Again, I know it sounds like I just said a bunch of stuff I didn't like about this book, but I still really enjoyed the characters and all that, and I'm excited to see how it will wrap up in the third book whenever I can finally get my hands on it. I then picked up Superman Dawnbreaker by Matt De La Pena. This is the 4th book in the DC Icons series. In this book we follow Clark Kent when he is a teenager, and he's still kind of learning how to use his powers, and he's still discovering new powers like all the time. So he's just kind of trying to figure out how to use his powers and control them. At the same time, people are going missing from Smallville, and so he's trying to figure that out as well. I didn't like this book at all. I was gonna do a whole like rant review, but I was like, I don't need that kind of negativity in my life, so I'm just gonna quickly wrap it up here and hopefully never talk about it again. But I should say I'm not a big like Superman person. Like, I've never seen the movies. I've probably watched the TV show ages ago when it first came out, and I was probably like 5, so I don't really remember any of it, so I don't know a lot about Superman or how well his character was portrayed in here. I don't know about that, but he was a very boring character. Like, the author did not try to make him, in my opinion, like interesting at all. He was very boring, very bland, and so were all of the other characters in here. But my main problem with this book was the plot. There was this like subplot throughout the whole book that was very political, and it focused on like immigration and racial discrimination, which are very important topics and things that I think should be discussed in literature, but if you're going to discuss those topics, you really need to do them well, and I just don't think it was done well in this book. It felt very forced, and because this is a book that is meant for like young adults, which are like 13-year-olds to like 18 or whatever it is, I just don't think that's a good way to tackle such a heavy topic when you're dealing with younger readers. It felt very forced in my opinion. And there were also a couple issues in here where I tried to look it up on Goodreads and see other people's reviews to see if they also found this issue, and nobody else brought it up, so maybe I'm reading into it too much. But there was like this one scene where a guy who is, I think, Mexican, was just being like beat up in a barn somewhere, and Clark Kent comes and saves him, and when the guy is walking away, Clark Kent's like, you gotta go to the hospital or something. He's like, no, I can't, they will take me away from my family. And Clark Kent said something like, I could kind of relate to the guy because people would treat me differently if they knew about my powers. And I was just like, that is not the same thing. Being treated differently because you have superpowers and being treated differently because of this color of your skin are not things that can be comparable on any scale. And he brought that up like 3 different times in this book, and every single time I was just like, why do you keep saying that? Those are not the same things and they're not comparable at all. So I didn't feel like that issue and that topic was handled well. So yeah, I didn't like this book. This is my 1-star read, if you couldn't tell. I then read The Cat That Walked By Himself. This is by Kipling, which I've never read before, and I actually listened to this as an audiobook as well in a video that I found on YouTube. And yeah, this was another just like short story about a cat that was very clever, and I can't really tell you much because it was a very short story, but I really enjoyed it. It was cute. I then picked up You by Carolyn Kepnes. This is a pretty popular thriller novel that, once again, I'm very late to the game in reading. In this book, we follow a guy called Joe, and he becomes obsessed with this girl and starts stalking her, but it's told in the second person, which is like that's like what everybody seems to love about this book, is like how unique the second person thing is. I did not love this book as much as everybody else seems to. The one thing I will say is that the writing was really good, and not even for the fact that it's told in second person. Like, yes, that was like a unique way of telling it, but sometimes I almost felt like the second person thing didn't really fit with like what the guy would be talking about. But her writing was extremely like engaging, and it flowed just super well, and I flew through this book despite basically hating everything else about it. I just loved the writing. Like, the writing completely gripped me from the beginning. So I'd love for this author to like write other kinds of stories, because I feel like I'm just really into her writing. However, as far as everything else about this book, the characters, I did not like any of them. They're all honestly horrible people, and they don't really have a lot of redeeming qualities, so in the end, I felt like there was really nobody for me to root for. The plot of this book I wasn't interested in at all, probably because I didn't like the characters, and I was really hoping it would redeem it with the ending, like give me a really shocking ending, but no, I found the ending to be pretty predictable and anticlimactic, so yeah, this was just a pretty disappointing read, but it had really good writing, so there's that. I then read The Girl with the Lower Back Tattoo by Amy Schumer. I listened to this as an audiobook. I know a lot of people do not like Amy Schumer and don't find her funny. I personally, sometimes I really find her funny, and then other times her jokes just do not land with me, and that was kind of how I felt about this book. This is her memoir, by the way, if you didn't realize that. I enjoyed this book. There were lots of parts where I did find it funny and I was enjoying my time listening to it. I was like, this is a lot of fun. And then there were other times where I was just completely bored with what she was talking about and the jokes just didn't really land for me. So yeah, this book was okay. I think if you like Amy Schumer, you should pick it up. I do definitely recommend listening to the audiobook because it was narrated by her, and I think a lot of the jokes come across better with her reading it, because obviously she wrote it with like the timing and everything in mind, so I just think it comes across better as an audiobook in her own words. So yeah, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't the greatest book ever. Finally, I read Moment of Truth by Casey West. This is her latest novel. I have read every single one of her books, and I have loved every single one, but this one was no exception. I loved it also. This book we follow our main character called Hadley, and she is in high school and she's a swimmer, and this book opens with us at her like swim meet or tournament. Like I don't know what the terminology is, but she's about to dive into the water when all of a sudden somebody dressed in a Heath Hall costume, which Heath Hall is like what I imagine to be like this world's Spider-Man. He's like a Hollywood superhero. Someone dressed in his costume crashes the swim meet, and she's so distracted by him that she ends up coming in fourth in the race, or whatever it's called. She's very annoyed by that, so she's trying to find out who this Heath Hall imposter is, because he's been crashing quite a few events, and it's suspected that he is somebody from her school. So she's trying to find out who he is, and yeah, this was just a really cute, fun story. As per usual, Casey West did not fail to impress me. I feel like a lot of people that liked Casey West back when like I first started liking her work do not enjoy her books as much anymore, or don't even read them anymore, because I think we've kind of all realized that yes, her writing is kind of simple, yes, the plots are a bit predictable and they all like end the same way, and yes, her main characters are kind of all the same girl, but I still really enjoy them. Like, is her writing simple? Yes, but is it really like engaging and flows really well, makes you want to keep reading? Yes, so I really enjoy that part of it. And while her plots are a little bit predictable, I really like that while we do get this nice romance, we also tend to tackle some heavier topics. For instance, in this book, our main character, her brother died of leukemia like before she was even born, and this causes some like tension between her and her parents, and specifically her mom. I don't want to talk too much about it because it like unfolds much later in the story, but we do tackle these heavier topics, and I really appreciate that, and I think it's done really, really well. So while it's not the best book ever, I have a really, really good time while reading it. and it's just a really kind of nice story that sometimes I read a lot of heavy stuff. It's nice to just have this little break of something that's light and easy to read. So I really enjoyed it. I would still recommend it, and yeah. So those are all of the books that I read in March. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave me a comment down below and let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. I'd love to discuss them with you in the comments. If you did like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!
You hear that, Samson?